Have you ever wondered if the VA owes you thousands, maybe tens of thousands, of dollars in retroactive pay that you just haven't received yet? The answer statistically is yes. The VA system is designed with layers of complexity. And while they follow the rules, they certainly don't advertise the loopholes and procedural nuances that can dramatically change your effective date the day your money clock starts ticking. We're not talking about minor adjustments here. We're talking about financial life rafts that can span years. This video is dedicated to pulling back the curtain on the 8 most critical, often misunderstood truths about VA retroactive pay. The things that VA representatives usually don't volunteer because they assume you already know the legal code. If you've ever filed a claim, appealed a decision, or wondered why your effective date seems suspiciously late, you need to hear this, because understanding these technicalities is the difference between getting a few $100s and getting a massive lump sum deposit. The single most important concept the VA glosses over is the power of the intent to file, ITF, and the critical 365-day buffer it provides. When veterans talk about filing a claim, they often think about the day they finally hit submit on that mountain of evidence and forms. That is a mistake that can cost you a fortune. The VA knows this. They know the process of gathering medical records, buddy statements, and nexus letters takes time. If you wait until you have everything perfectly organized before you start the process, you have already lost money. The intent to file is your financial placeholder. It's essentially a formal notification to the VA saying, I intend to file for this benefit, and when I do, I want the clock to stay. RT running today. This single action, which takes mere minutes online or over the phone, establishes your potential effective date. Once you file that intent to file, the VA gives you a crucial, non-negotiable window. 365 days. That is 1 full year to gather everything you need: the C&P exam results, the private medical opinions, the personal statements, without losing a single day of potential back pay. If you submit your completed application on day 366, you lose the entire benefit of the ITF, and your effective date snaps forward to the actual submission date. This is the first and often the largest financial trap. Let's dissect this 365-day rule, because its technical application is where the money lives or dies. Imagine a veteran, let's call him Sergeant Miller, who starts feeling significant symptoms related to his service in January 2024. He spends 8 months gathering private medical evidence, waiting for appointments, and trying to decipher the VA forms. He finally submits his claim in September 2024. His effective date, absent any other factors, will be September 2024. Now imagine Sergeant Smith, who felt the same symptoms in January 2024. He immediately logs into the VA website, clicks the Intent to File button, and then spends the next 8 months gathering his evidence. When he submits his claim in September 2024, his effective date retroactively jumps back to January 2024. That 8-month difference, especially if he is rated at a high percentage, can easily be $10,000 or more in instant retroactive pay. The VA doesn't send out a reminder email when your ITF is about to expire. They rely on the veteran to manage that deadline meticulously. If you let that 365-day window close without submitting the complete claim, you must file a new intent to file, and the clock resets, permanently losing that initial period of entitlement. This mechanism is crucial not just for initial claims, but for claims seeking an increase. If your condition worsens significantly, filing an intent to file immediately locks in the date of that worsening, even if it takes you months to get the new medical documentation to prove it. This 365-day buffer is arguably the most powerful tool a veteran has for protecting their back pay, and it is entirely dependent on proactive, immediate action, long before the paperwork is ready. Moving past the initial filing, we encounter the second major roadblock, the critical distinction between the effective date and the date of entitlement. Many veterans confuse these terms, believing they are interchangeable. They are not, and this difference can create a hidden financial gap. The effective date is the date the VA legally recognizes your entitlement to benefits began. This is usually the date of your intent to file, the date the claim was received, or in some cases, the date your condition worsened. However, the date of entitlement is the date from which you are actually paid. In most standard initial claims, the date of entitlement is the first day of the month following. The effective date, this is the first subtle way the VA minimizes back pay. If your effective date is January 5th, your entitlement date is February 1st. You don't get paid for those 26 days in January. While this seems minor on a monthly basis, understanding this rule prevents confusion when calculating lump sums. The real complexity arises when dealing with specific types of claims, such as dependency and indemnity compensation, DIC, or specific statutory awards. For standard service-connected disability, the 1-month lag is consistent. But let's look at claims involving continuous prosecution of a claim, or claims that were previously denied and later granted through appeal. In these scenarios, the effective date might be years in the past, say 2018, but the date of entitlement is still calculated based on when the VA finally issued the rating decision but retroactively applied back to 2018. The calculation must be precise. The VA uses complex tables and formulas to determine the exact amount owed for each period, especially if the rating percentage changed over time. For example, if you were 30% in 2018, 50% in 2020, and 70% in 2022, the retroactive payment must be calculated in 3 DISTI NCT phases using the pay rates applicable to those specific years, not the current rate. Many veterans simply check the final lump sum and assume it's correct. You must verify the effective dates used for each change in rating throughout the retroactive period, ensuring the VA didn't accidentally use a later effective date for one of the percentage bumps. This level of auditing is not something the VA customer service representative is trained or paid to do for you. It is entirely the veteran's responsibility to scrutinize the award letter and ensure every single month is accounted for at the correct historical rate. This leads us directly into the third hidden truth, which addresses the common veteran frustration. The C&P exam delay. Myth: when VA delays, actually count for back pay. We've all heard the horror stories. A veteran files their claim and then waits 6, 9, or 12 months just for the compensation and pension C&P exam. Veterans often assume logically that because the VA is responsible for this delay, the VA must extend the effective date or somehow compensate for the lost time. This assumption is largely incorrect, and relying on it is a costly error. In the vast majority of cases, a delay in scheduling your C&P exam, even if it stretches for months, does not push your effective date forward, provided you filed your intent to file or initial claim properly. If you filed an intent to file in January and your C&P exam isn't until October, your effective date remains January. The delay doesn't hurt your effective date because the VA is still operating under the premise that you filed your claim within the legally mandated timelines. However, there is a crucial exception to this rule, and this is the part the VA often fails to explain clearly. Why? The delay does become an issue, potentially resulting in a later effective date if the delay forces the veteran past a critical appeal deadline. For instance, if the VA sends you a denial, you have 1 year to appeal or file a supplemental claim. If the VA's internal processing delay, like a C&P scheduling issue, eats up so much time that you miss the 1-year appeal window for a previous decision, you might lose the ability to link the new claim back to the original effective date. This is why vigilance is paramount. If you receive a decision, even a partial grant, and you disagree with the rating or the effective date, You must initiate the appeal process, higher-level review, supplemental claim, or BVA appeal, within that 365-day period. The VA's slow processing speed is generally seen as a non-factor in determining the effective date, unless that slow speed results in a proceedee, error on the VA's part that prejudice the veteran's ability to meet a deadline. This is a subtle legal point. The VA is generally protected from its own internal scheduling delays, but it is not protected if those delays prevent you from exercising your due process rights. If you can prove that the VA's delay caused you to miss a deadline that would have preserved an earlier effective date, you have a strong legal argument for retroactive pay adjustment. This argument requires documentation, often involving the date you requested the exam versus the date it was scheduled, and demonstrating how that delay directly impacted a subsequent filing deadline. Without that direct link, the C&P delay is merely an inconvenience, not a retroactive pay trigger. Now we pivot to a strategy that can unlock years of back pay. The secret to secondary conditions. Using new diagnoses to push your effective date-back years. Most veterans file claims based on primary conditions directly resulting from service. They get their rating and move on. But many service-connected conditions are progressive, leading to secondary conditions. For example, severe knee pain leading to secondary depression, or diabetes leading to peripheral neuropathy. When a veteran files a claim for a secondary condition, the common assumption is that the effective date for that new rating will be the date the secondary claim was filed. This is often incorrect, and it is the key to massive retroactive payments. The law dictates that if a secondary condition is directly and medically linked to a primary service-connected condition, and that primary condition was service-connected years ago, the effective date for the secondary condition can potentially be pushed back to the effective date of the primary condi. Tie-in provided. The medical evidence shows the secondary condition began at or near the time of the primary condition's origin. This is a profound difference. If a veteran was service-connected for PTSD in 2010 and in 2023 files for IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, as a secondary condition, and the medical evidence, the nexus, shows that the IBS symptoms began in 2011, the VA should assign an effective date of 2011 for the IBS rating, not 2023. This difference represents 12 years of back pay at the higher combined rating. The VA rarely volunteers this interpretation. They prefer to assign the filing date, 2023, because it simplifies their process and minimizes the payout. To successfully argue for the earlier effective date for a secondary claim, the veteran must specifically provide medical evidence that pinpoints the onset of the secondary condition. This requires a highly detailed nexus letter from a medical professional who is willing to review historical records and state unequivocally that based on the evidence, e.g., old treatment notes mentioning digestive issues in 2011, the secondary condition began or was symptomatic at that earlier date. This is not about the date the condition was diagnosed, but the date the symptoms became manifest. This level of detail in the nexus letter is absolutely crucial. If the nexus letter simply states, the veteran now has IBS secondary to PTSD, the VA will use the filing date. If the nexus letter states, based on the veteran's service medical records and subsequent treatment notes from 2011, it is determined that the veteran's IBS symptoms began in early 2011, directly secondary to the onset of the service-connected PTSD. You have a strong case for years of retroactive pay. This is a high-stakes, documentation-heavy strategy that requires proactive legal or accredited representative assistance, but the financial rewards can be transformative. Let's discuss the most powerful yet rarest tool in the veteran's arsenal for retroactive pay. The clear and unmistakable error, CUE. Exception, the rare legal pathway to open up decades-old claims. A Q claim is the nuclear option. It is a legal assertion that the VA made a factual or legal mistake in a final decision that was so obvious, so profound, that it fundamentally altered the outcome of the claim at the time the decision was made. The crucial element of a KIU is that the error must be apparent based only on the evidence and regulations that existed in the VA file at the time of the original decision. You cannot use new evidence or new laws to argue a KIU. This is why CU claims are notoriously difficult to win, but when they do succeed, they can result in the largest retroactive payments, sometimes spanning 20 or 30 years. The VA does not advertise the CU process. In fact, they actively discourage frivolous CU claims because they force the VA to reopen final decisions. A Q claim is not an appeal. It is a collateral attack on a final judgment. Examples of successful Q claims include the VA failing to apply a specific regulation that was in force at the time, or misinterpreting clear service medical records that were in the file. For instance, if a veteran was denied in 1995 for a specific condition, but the 1995 rating decision clearly stated, "The veteran has X symptoms, but we find no nexus," and a KIU analysis reveals that a specific VA regulation in 1995 actually mandated service connection based on those documented symptoms, AI, show presumptive condition, then the veteran could argue CUU. The error was unmistakable because the VA failed to apply the law correctly to the facts they already had. If a CU is successfully proven, the effective date of the granted benefit retroactively jumps back to the date of the original flawed decision. This is where the life-changing money comes from. Imagine a Q claim that successfully overturns a 1985 denial. The veteran is now owed pay from 1985 to the present. The complexity of calculating these payments is immense, involving historical pay tables, cost of living adjustments, COLAs, and potential offsets for other benefits received. Because the stakes are so high and the legal burden so steep, CUE claims almost always require specialized legal representation, often from a veteran's law attorney who understands the historical regulatory environment. The VA doesn't walk veterans through the steps of identifying a CU. It is a process entirely driven by the veteran and their legal advocate identifying the specific, documented procedural flaw in the decades-old decision. Never assume a denied claim is permanently closed. A KUE is the ultimate backdoor to justice and massive retroactive pay, provided the original decision contained that critical, undeniable error. Our sixth point addresses a common misconception about family benefits. The dependency claim. Backdoor, maximizing retroactive payments for family. Many veterans, especially those who were single when they initially filed or were slow to update their marital status, assume that adding a spouse or children later only starts the increased payment clock from the date the dependency claim was filed. This is frequently wrong, and it's a source of missed retroactive funds. The rule is this. If the veteran was already service-connected at the required rating, usually 30% or higher, during the period the dependent was eligible, but the veteran simply failed to file the dependency claim, the VA can still award retroactive pay for those dependents, but only for a specific period. The VA will generally retroactively pay for the dependent going back 1 year from the date the VA received the dependency claim. This is a crucial 1-year limitation that veterans often miss. Example: a veteran was rated 50% service-connected in 2015. He got married in 2017. He forgot to tell the VA about his marriage until he filed the dependency claim in 2023. If he filed in June 2023, the VA will retroactively pay him for his spouse's dependency benefit only back to June 2022, 1 year. He loses the benefit from 2017 to 2022. The VA does not actively track marriages or births. The onus is entirely on the veteran to report these changes. However, there is a significant exception to this 1-year rule that the VA rarely clarifies. If the veteran filed the dependency claim within 1 year of the date the dependent became eligible, e.g. within 1 year of the marriage date or the child's birth date, the VA must pay the full retroactive amount back to the date of eligibility. If the veteran was married on January 1, 2023, and files the dependency claim on December 31, 2023, the VA must pay the full year of retroactive dependent benefits back to January 1, 2023. If they file on January 2, 2024, they lose 11 months of pay as the 1-year limitation kicks in from the filing date. This is a technicality that requires immediate action upon any life change. For veterans who have been rated 30% or higher for years and recently realized they forgot to add dependents, understanding the difference between the 1-year limitation from filing date and the full retroactivity, if filed within 1 year of eligibility, is essential for maximizing their lump sum payment. This is often the easiest retroactive money to claim, provided the veteran acts quickly. Let's now delve into the complex machinery of appeals. The BVA Appeal Timeline Trap. How the Board of Veterans Appeals process can save or sink your back pay. When a veteran appeals a denial or an unfavorable effective date, the goal is not just to win the appeal, but to maintain the continuous prosecution of the claim. This continuity is the golden thread that links the final decision back to the original effective date, usually the intent to file. If the chain of appeals is broken by missing a deadline, withdrawing the claim, or allowing a denial to become final, that golden thread is severed and the effective date resets to the date of the new filing. The VA offers 3 paths for review: higher level review, HLR, supplemental claim, SC, and appeal to the Board of Veterans Appeals, BVA. Each path has a 365-day deadline from the date of the unfavorable decision. If you file any of these within the year, the continuity is preserved. The BVA process, however, introduces unique complexities that can either secure or destroy years of back pay. When appealing to the BVA, the veteran chooses a docket: direct review, fastest, no new evidence; evidence submission, new evidence allowed; or hearing, veteran speaks to a judge. The key to preserving back pay in the BVA process is understanding that the BVA decision, if favorable, mandates that the VA assign the effective date of the original claim, provided that claim was continuously pursued. The BVA decision itself doesn't grant the pay. It directs the VA Regional Office, RO, to implement the decision, including the effective date. The trap lies in the remand. A BVA remand occurs when the board finds that the VA Regional Office failed to follow proper procedure, perhaps by not obtaining necessary medical records or not providing a proper C&P exam. The BVA sends the case back to the RO for corrective action. While a remand is generally a good sign, the process can take years. During this remand period, the continuity of the claim is preserved. The veteran must ensure that when the RO finally issues a new decision following the remand, the effective date calculation correctly refers back to the initial filing date, not the date of the remand decision or the datee of the post-remand C&P exam. The VA often defaults to the later date, and the veteran must be ready to challenge this immediately, citing the continuous prosecution of the claim. If the veteran fails to challenge an incorrect effective date after a remand, that date could become final, and years of back pay could be lost simply due to procedural oversight. Maintaining vigilance through the multi-year BVA process is essential for protecting the retroactive funds that have been accumulating during the appeal. Our 7th and highly technical point is the crucial difference between the retroactive rules for an AURA increase claim versus a new claim. Veterans often use the same form, VA Form 21-526EZ, for both, but the rules governing the effective date, and thus the back pay, are significantly different. For a PACA new claim, A condition never before service-connected, the effective date is generally the date of the intent to file or the date the claim was received. That's straightforward. For an increase claim, seeking a higher rating for an already service-connected condition, the rules introduce two separate possibilities for retroactivity, and the VA will only apply the one that favors the veteran, which usually means the veteran must provide the evidence to support the earliest date. Possibility A, the standard increase. If a veteran files for an increase and the medical evidence shows the worsening occurred, before the filing date, the VA can grant an effective date going back up to 1 year prior to the date the claim was received. If the evidence shows the condition warranted the higher rating at that earlier time, this is the 1-year look-back rule for increases. If a veteran files for an increase in 2024 and provides medical records from 2023 clearly showing the condition met the higher rating criteria, the VA must retroactively pay back to 2023. This is a critical opportunity for back pay that relies entirely on the veteran providing historical evidence of the severity. Possibility B, the staged rating. This is where the complexity truly sets in and can lead to massive back pay. If the veteran's condition worsened in distinct stages over time, the VA must assign a staged rating. For instance, if the veteran was 30% in 2010, the condition worsened to 50% in 2015 and then worsened again to 70% in 2020, but the veteran only filed for the increase in 2024. If the veteran can provide medical evidence, private doctor opinions, historical treatment notes, proving the 50% level was met in 2015 and the 70% level was met in 2020, the VA must assign a staged rating, retroactively paying the 50% rate from 2015 to 2020 and the 70% rate from 2020 to 2024. The VA will not search for this evidence. The veteran must package it explicitly and argue for the staged rating based on the historical documentation. This requires a level of detail in the claim submission that goes far beyond simply stating, "My condition got worse." It requires proving when it got worse and by how much, using the VA's own rating schedule criteria. The VA will generally default to the 1-year look-back, possibility A, unless the veteran forces the issue of the staged rating, possibility B, with compelling historical evidence. The sheer scale of the VA system, the labyrinthine regulatory structure, and the reliance on the veteran to proactively assert their rights means that millions of dollars in rightful retroactive pay are left unclaimed every year. The VA's duty is to grant benefits to the maximum extent permitted by law, but their operational reality means they prioritize efficiency, often defaulting to the simplest, least retroactive effective date unless challenged. The key takeaway from all of these hidden truths is that the date you file your claim is merely the starting line. The effective date, the date that determines your retroactive payment, is a malleable, complex legal finding that can be pushed backward years or even decades through careful strategy, meticulous documentation, and an understanding of the specific procedural loopholes that the VA doesn't advertise. Whether it's the immediate action required by the intent to file, the strategic use of secondary conditions to link back to old effective dates, or the nuclear option of a QE claim, maximizing your retroactive pay demands that you become a vigilant advocate for your own claim. Do not accept the first effective date the VA offers. Scrutinize the decision, compare it against the historical evidence, and if you suspect an error, file that appeal immediately to preserve the continuity of your claim. Your financial future, and potentially a lump sum payment that changes your life, depends on your mastery of these technical unspoken rules. Understand the code and claim the back pay you rightfully earned through your service.